Why do orcs fight? Because it's fun. Because it's something to do. It's more about going in as loud as possible, causing as much damage, and dying in the most brutal or like hilarious fashion. It's fun to see how close they can get to their target before pulling up. And because they're such shit pilots, they basically just crash into you half the time.
Ladies and gentlemen, what are the top 10 best orc jobs in Warhammer 40K? Let's find out. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war.
You Oomies think you have it hard? Well, the orcs have their proper tough jobs, and we'll smash the stupid Oomies to pieces, and anything else that messes with the orcs.
Let's fucking go, boys!
Orcs, bigger than your average humanoid of the galaxy, coupled with being angrier, smashier, and far more randomly violent. Generally open to casual brutality beyond most of your more, let's say, measured or at least focused 40k entities, and while the galaxy as we know is a place filled to the brim with acts of extreme violence, the uncommon thing about the orcs is their generally sunny disposition about such matters. Seeing the person next to you wailing as they're torn in half, leaving you showered in blood, would for several of the races in the darkened future give at least pause for concern, more likely running screaming in terror, but for the orcs they would likely feel invigorated and positively encouraged to charge even more enthusiastically at their enemy.
Yeah, I mean, the Warhammer 40k universe is absolutely terrible, but if you had to choose to be a race there, choose Orc. They are the only ones having a fun time. In fact, they're having a blast.
Orcs tend not to share the same concerns as other races with regard to the bigger picture concerning their race's general achievements, their failings, or overarching collective strategy. To put it simply, orcs just don't really care about what's happening in the wider scheme of things. The result is that orcs generally have one of the most objectively carefree lives compared to almost all others, save for perhaps the Tyrannids.
Well, the thing is with the Tyrannids is I don't know how sentient they are. I don't know how much they're thinking. But the Tyrannids are the Zerg, the original Zerg, and they are much scarier, which is a tall order because the Zerg are absolutely terrifying.
For who the concepts of fear, worry and disappointment or frustration even are surely completely absent. So with this in mind, you have to understand that it's really quite difficult to compile a worst or best jobs list for the orcs, because you could generally consider they are happy for most of the time, and the worst jobs will more likely entail anything very mundane or that leaves them out of battle. Strangely though, when you think about it, orcs often seem to generally love whatever they're doing, so this really makes it quite difficult to assign any kind of excessively negative or positive association with roles for them.
Well, as he says, it would be just whatever's boring and not fighting. That would just be the worst thing possible for them. In Warhammer Fantasy, you have a guy called
Grimgor Ironhide,
who's just a legendary orc. He looks like Shrek with a really bad temper. And I think according to the lore, Grimgor has never gone for more than 2 days without fighting. And all the orcs are terrified of what might happen if he went for 3. They are basically the same, very similar psychologically, the fantasy orcs and the 40k orcs. So I imagine the same thing applies to them here.
Much more so than other races where the concepts of ego and social impact are far more apparent and understood. Also, in regards to orc culture, I'll include these sub-races like the Gretchin, the Grots, and Snotlings, the Snots. So we approach this with perhaps more the perspective of someone subjectively outside looking in, say an Imperial Xenos scholar perhaps, who could assign some more humanistic perceptions.
I just love this art style. It's just so old school. You know, there's just so much character coming out of these guys. Like, are they beautiful? No. But it doesn't matter because they just look sick. Back when characters were characters. Before everyone was concerned about looks maxing and OnlyFans, you had characters like these.
First up, a big guns Grot. Now while orcs as we know will run towards their enemy with glee and blood-curdling screams, they often will still use field artillery to back up their onslaught. These massive shooty guns are referred to accurately as big guns. Entertainingly hazardous to their operators as much their enemy, they fall into 3 main descriptions. Cannon, with a K, being a large bore shell of either a fragmentation or solid slug for smashing enemy armour. Lobbers are more akin to a big mortar or sometimes even using a catapult with an explosive payload fired high to then land deep in enemy lines, dealing maximum damage. Or the stranger Zap, with 2 Zs gun, which fires a large arc of electrical discharge.
What's interesting, they seem to have a different opinion about artillery than the fantasy orcs do. Because I think the fantasy orcs just like to get in your face and it's all
melee and stuff.
But then again, we're in 40k, all right? These are space battles. You need some artillery. But there is a battle I remember in Total War Warhammer where Grimgor is giving like a speech before one of these story battles. And he actually talks about, you know, you boys go around and take out the artillery at the back. But of course, the way he says it is something like,
All right, wolf boys, go round the back and take out them big guns. That's just cheating.
so yeah, the fantasy orcs regard artillery as
Cheating.
But in 40k, you kind of need everything at your disposal because everything is ramped up a lot.
Discharge into the targeted enemy. Operating any orc technology is usually with a fair amount of risk, but for the Grots operating big guns, the nature of their powerful munitions means the chances of something being fairly unpleasant, as and when it goes wrong, are significantly increased. The Zap operator, for example, will deliver an electrical discharge relative to the nerve of the Grot firing the weapon. The firepower increases the longer the lever for delivery is held down and continues to increase the power of the shot. Too short and the weapon will do little more than spurt and crackle, and too long and the chances of it overloading and disintegrating its operator increases. Cannon operators, though, face the additional hazard of having to retrieve or inspect rounds, which could involve reaching down on a large enough cannon, perhaps climbing inside the barrel. Depending on the design of the cannon, this could be a dud round that needs replacing, or it could be a shoddy machine which caused a light strike not triggering the shell's primer. The likelihood of the Grots operating mates resisting the temptation to try to repeatedly still fire the round, potentially shredding or segmenting their fellow operator in the process, is slim, not when much hilarity is to be had for those not risking life and limb.
That's the thing. They'll just do it. They know it's your job to go down and dislodge the jammed round, but as you're doing that, they're probably just going to try and fire it because it's funny. There's absolutely no long-term thinking with these guys.
Even avoiding such catastrophic injury doesn't allow big gun operators to avoid their disabling effects, as the firing of such massive weapons will quickly deafen its gunners, leaving them to use very basic sign language of pointing and waving to get by, which rarely extends to any permanent form of more elaborate communication. On top of all this, big gun operators are unlikely to see with real clarity how effective the rounds they deliver to an enemy are, not with any grisly details, and so this, coupled with the debilitating effects of the weapons, lead them to be a role which few would opt for, and even for a passionate orc or Gretchin, it's really hard to put a positive spin on this beyond helping other orcs deal nasty damage to their foe. Up next would be experimenting, or an unnecessary surgery test subject. Now, orcs are generally extremely tough physiologically. They heal fast and are capable of suffering extreme anatomical trauma that would either physically or mentally overwhelm most other mortal races. As with much of what orcs do when it comes to medical treatment, this is not a studied field. Orcs do not study and learn how to repair physical damage, and more often than not it's probably unnecessary. Instead, some orcs may simply lean instinctively toward wanting to and being capable of more effectively performing surgery and body modifications on other orcs. In some cases where an orc has been heavily wounded in a fight with another orc perhaps and is still deemed worthy of salvaging. A doc or painboy, or perhaps later to be designated as a bad doc, may attempt some form of restorative surgery, or more likely adaptation and installation of some kind of cybernetic body augmentation.
Oh, no.
These kind of restorative procedures, though, are at best pretty crude, and where humans may use some kind of careful stitching of a wound or internal surgery, orcs would just use a staple gun, which sounds pretty nasty, but bear in mind orcs' heads can be detached live from their bodies for some time, and can even be transplanted onto another body if done before death.
I actually didn't know that about orcs. An orc's head can be removed from its body, and as long as it doesn't die in that time, you can just put it on another orc, I guess. Orc physiology also works differently from, like, Warcraft, for example. Like, Warcraft, you know, you can have an orc wife and an orc child, all right? Male and female orcs exist. That's not how it works in Warhammer. Orcs are more like a fungus. They are an all-male race. I think instead of having genitals, they have, like, I think a fungal spore pack. And when they die, it drops on the ground, plants heaps of little orc spores, and then those grow into fully grown orcs.
Worse than just the generally rough and ready medical repairs, though, are test subjects for docs. Like most other elements of orc culture, like mechs, who love to just try out whatever they think would be a good idea to make a vehicle or mechanical more powerful in speed or firepower, a doc may decide that he's had a great idea for how to make an orc work better. This could be through an orc who was rendered temporarily unconscious, or one who has been brought in for medical repairs.
Just look at that artwork, mate. Absolutely no punches pulled with this design, man. Like, this guy just looks so unreasonable.
They could have been perhaps persuaded that the doc's idea would definitely 100% make them stronger, bigger, or generally more capable at smashing their rivals. These unnecessary surgeries are often pretty horrific. Anesthetic, what's that? It's certainly more in the service of satisfying a doc's curiosity than they are about whatever end goal they were hoping to achieve. They certainly wouldn't have been tested out in any careful fashion and are far more of a spur of the moment or improvised idea, a light bulb moment, which will often result in unpleasant injury, death, or extreme disfigurement than it would any positive achievement for an orc. Still though, in terms of positive or negative, some orcs would probably not care too much, considering that they would die while undergoing whatever horrible surgery the doc was attempting, and again, on the off chance that the doc was actually able to achieve his random inspirational modification, the orc in question would certainly consider the unpleasant sawing, cutting and spurting to be worthwhile. But for those left ruined and more incapable than before, even by orc standards, due to the doc's surgery, it's hard to see how they could walk away feeling good about their situation, unless they were simply just too stupid and were persuaded by the doc that it was all a fantastic success.
The thing is, that's actually like a thing that could happen. Like, orcs are not known for their intellect, shall we say, and you probably could just fool them that it was actually an improvement. Also, a lot of these orc surgeries, I think as long as both of them believe that it's a benefit, it probably actually just will be. Like, that's kind of how orc technology works. As long as you think it will do a thing, it will then do a thing.
To mention, when it comes to scars for orcs, the more severe the better, as they're seen as a mark of toughness and deserve respect. And orc...
Okay, that's a bad job. Being an experimental test subject for surgery as an orc, it doesn't matter if you're an orc, that's still gonna hurt. It's not the fun kind of pain. The pain of getting shot while you're trying to club some space marine's head in. This is just horrible.
An orc commando is an orc who prefers to use what qualifies as cunning and stealth for an orc. They are infiltrators and saboteurs and prefer to ambush their enemy than they do run charging at it screaming for blood. This unconventional nature means they're often viewed suspiciously and with a relative amount of disdain by other orcs, as much of their behaviour seems to run counter to much of orc culture.
Yeah, that is very un-orc-like. Cunning is an element of orc nature, but it's not like an orc to be a rogue or a stealthy assassin. Like, it's more about going in as loud as possible, causing as much damage, and dying in the most brutal or like hilarious fashion possible.
Commandos will creep up on unsuspecting enemies, stabbing, slashing and slitting enemies' vulnerable areas before they can fight back, as well as strangely targeting munitions and resources in a seemingly unusually focused manner for an individual orc unit. Because other orcs often view those who end up in the commando role as being time wasters or just plain cowards who refuse to face their enemy head on with all guns blazing, commandos will often exile themselves temporarily or sometimes permanently so as to avoid having to engage in social interaction with others who would likely give them a hard time. Commandos are often even able to read other languages, as the orcs who end up in this role usually are of a higher intelligence than your average orc, although to be fair that's not an especially high bar to rise above. Still, how they are able to do this is difficult to understand. Likely, as with all orc traits, it's a genetic and instinctive one, and they're somehow able to see patterns and systems within written language, enabling them to learn and more easily replicate languages of other races that they encounter. They then will turn this to their advantage in carrying out their sabotage or planned ambushes.
It's not even just that. It could be as simple as they think they can understand the language, so therefore they can. Like, that's actually how orc powers work. Like, a lot of their technology, it's not that they have got a specific design for a gun. It's that they just mashed pieces of metal together that looked like a gun, and then they think it's a gun, and therefore it works like a gun. You know what I mean? And that's why you can't use orc technology. If you beat these guys or capture them, their tanks don't work and their guns don't work because they don't work. They only work because the orcs think they do. 40k orcs are extremely powerful psykers, but they're too stupid to realize this. And we all know the cliche cliche of like, oh yeah, they paint their cars red so they go faster. But it gets even dumber than that. Apparently orc spaceships don't have windows because they don't know that they're not supposed to be able to breathe in space. The reason they can breathe in space is because they don't know that you're not supposed to be able to do that. They think they can breathe in space, therefore they can. This is one of the most bizarre cases of being overpowered, but incredibly stupid at the same time. Being overpowered, but being completely unaware of how powerful you are, or why you're even that powerful. It's so dumb. But that's what's so cool about 40k, is that even the comic relief race, like the orcs, are still really powerful. They don't have Geller fields, so warp monsters spawning into their ships are just in-flight entertainment. I think orc spaceships don't have anything to prevent enemies from the warp coming into their ship. But why would you want less fighting? Like, you're an orc. The more fighting on these long trips, the better. It's just, they're so dumb.
While they may be largely shunned by their fellow orcs for doing that sneaking about stuff, any war boss worth his teeth will recognise the commandos as being extremely useful assets that make for a far better outcome for any battle. Still, the role of a commando has to rank as one of the best or worst roles, depending on how you look at it. For the commandos themselves, it's possible they feel a bit miffed about missing out on the goings-on of orc culture, but on the other hand, their disposition probably means that general goings-on go fairly against the grain for them, and so, as with most orc roles, they aren't probably that bothered one way or the other.
It's also kind of cool that even though these guys are meant to be the stealthy assassins of the orcs, they're still just huge, and the fact that he's choosing to be stealthy kind of is even scarier.
On the more negative side of the coin, though, having to put yourself in a self-imposed exile, as well as your skills and achievements generally being completely underappreciated by your peers, has to be somewhat of a negative, even if you're just getting on with your own way of doing things. When orcs have no ongoing conflict, they need somehow to entertain themselves, and as with most things, this means finding some way to incorporate savage violence. It's basically a necessity. So orcs will often arrange pit fights, either against native predators on whatever world they happen to have built up some sort of established town or city, or control of a world itself, and they will of course fight against each other as well.
Well, when it was asked, why do orcs fight? I think their answer is something like, why wouldn't you? Because it's fun. Because it's something to do. If you ask them why they're so violent or why they want to fight all the time, they won't understand the question. It's like asking someone, why do you keep breathing? It's like, what else are you gonna do?
This may also lead to a war boss's authority being challenged by a rival. Now, these pit fights are of course popular as they entertain the whole warband, and so again it's a pretty hard one to argue that this is really a worst job in the strictest sense, but as I said, we have to perhaps just put anything which is not fighting in battle as a negative.
I'm sure they would enjoy this fighting regardless. It's a battle, sort of.
Maybe an outside perspective, because truly from an orc's point of view, they're going to struggle really to have too much of a negative or even strongly positive perspective on almost anything they do. Now, pit fighting can also be used to settle grudges and serves as whatever loose sense of law, not really law, the orcs use to guide their daily life. In terms of is it a best or worst task to have, pit fighting could be at its worst that an orc loses their face or head to a rival in an arguably pointless one-on-one battle, whereas he could have done the same thing while smashing some filthy humanoids in the process.
But it's not pointless, because if he wasn't fighting, then he wouldn't be fighting. And then what's the point of living? An orc who's not fighting is an oxymoron. I think as long as they're fighting, they're happy, almost regardless of the context. Remember how brutal the magic orcs were in WoW? The thing is, yeah, the idea of orcs using magic is strange to me. I mean, it makes sense in Warcraft because they do, especially Warcraft 2 orcs, where they're like properly evil and they use a lot of like undead magic.
But far more likely it's seen by them as a glorious positive, whereby they contribute to the further social status of a rising orc, or by gaining increased respect and power themselves by smashing his rival's head in or ripping it off.
Oh, so sick.
Not all the objectively bad roles to play in Orc society involve pain and or having your head smashed in. There is actually some social sniping that occurs even in Orc society. Most Orcs live together, rely and thrive upon this cooperative, albeit somewhat grating symbiosis. Orcs, Gretchins, Snots, Squiggs, it's all by design, yet some exist on the periphery of Orc society. and this can be optional like orc commandos and to a lesser extent flyboys and speed freaks. Basically anything that's outside the realms of good hard fighting may be shunned, and while orcs who flaunt their violence and strength of smashiness to other orcs are celebrated and an integral part of orc culture, in order for a war boss to carry out a campaign, he may wish to acquire more tech and firepower.
Look at how unbelievably brutal and simultaneously stupid this machine looks. And I think that is kind of orcs in a nutshell.
One source of this is the orc subculture of freebooters, essentially pirates and merchants who care a lot more about shiny things and wealth accumulation.
Orc pirates, why not? Let's just make them even worse.
Orcs like freebooters who love to show off their accumulated wealth and general swagger are not appreciated by most orcs. And this by no means is to say that all freebooters are showy posers who want to rub their accumulated wealth in the face of a clan. Some are fairly business-orientated merchants and straight-up pirates. Some though definitely enjoy nothing more than telling their fellow clanmates that they are considerably richer than you. And this general swaggering arrogance will be thinly tolerated by fellow orcs, and persistently shoving their wealth and success in the face of others will likely result in them being quite quickly kicked out of the clan on their arses.
That is quite interesting, because I do forget at times there actually is a sort of diversity with orcs when it comes to their intelligence and personalities. Like, it's very un-orc-like to kind of care about money at all, but these ones do. Or again, it's very un-orc-like to be specced into intelligence or stealth, but they exist. And they all do kind of have a function in their society. I guess they had to because, you know, you got to make this a complete culture if you're playing the tabletop game and fighting against other armies like, say, I don't know, like the Eldar or the Necrons. Like, they'll just have everything.
More than likely by the war boss themselves, who couldn't tolerate the thought of some lowly knob having weapons or tech bigger and more impressive than himself. The humiliation of being booted out though will be fleeting for most flash gits, who are probably still too blinded by their superior wealth to care and will undoubtedly end up signing aboard the local freebooters, desperate to find as quickly as possible a new source of teeth.
Just look at that jaw. Absolute Giga Chad right there. Look at a Warcraft orc, like say Thrall. There's a sense of nobility. They can be reasonable, intelligent. They may seem brutish and savage somewhat, but you know, strength and honor. There's none of that here.
While these flashy gits, as with most orcs, care little for the disdain and opinion of others, it's still pretty damning to be out on your arse for behaving like a flashy git. Snots definitely get the rough end of the stick in basically everything they're designated to do, but as always with the orc kind, they don't seem to be too fussed about it. They are the lesser form of orc, smaller than a Gretchin, and they're usually only about half a meter in height. Their general weakness and ineffectiveness at any combat means they occupy the lowest levels of orc society.
Yeah, being a snot is just complete shit. It sucks.
Snotlings will have the lowliest of tasks like fungus growing and of course livestock management. Livestock for the orcs means Squiggs, a wholly unpleasant creature crammed with teeth and generally featuring a behaviour of biting whatever is nearest at all times. Snotlings have something for an affinity for working with...
I forgot about these things. Squig is basically a gigantic mouth with 2 legs and a heaps fat body and a terrible temper. But I gotta say, there is something cute about them from a horrific Warhammer orc perspective.
Snotlings have something for an affinity for working with Squiggs, again likely by design, and so not too many of them end up being bitten in half by the Squiggs that they manage. Nonetheless, it's hardly a task one would opt for out of choice. Squiggs being hazardous to handle, some are bred as a food source, cooked...
Who the fuck put all these sticks of dynamite in this Squig's mouth? Again, one might think that maybe this is for a purpose. Maybe it's like a kamikaze Squig. But at the same time, knowing orcs, they could have just put them in there for fun.
Or what if we like put the boomstick in like the squig mouth? See what happens, you know?
For out of choice. Squiggs being hazardous to handle, some are bred as a food source, cooked or raw, and others are ammunition. Some might be strapped up as mobile IEDs, and some aptly titled face eaters are a heavily toothed variety which are used for orc entertainment in the always hilarious who can rip whose face off first contest. So you may imagine that for a Snotling, handling these and other like the flesh eater Squiggs is somewhat of a hostile work environment. Each day might be your last, and you may find yourself writhing around on the floor without a face, likely to the amusement of supervising runturd orcs.
If you get your face ripped off in the orc world, all the other orcs are just going to think it's funny. You know what I mean? I don't think they'd actually be too bothered by that, because orcs are not really concerned with his appearances at all, as far as I know. There's no orc women. The orcs are not like looks maxing or anything. They're not worried about how attractive they are. In fact, the concept of attraction is probably a foreign idea to them. They probably don't even know what it means.
A thankless task, your lot in life, the bottom of the pile, but part of the orc ecosystem and an essential one. Yet Snotlings can also take on a more proactive role. While individually in battle they may be quite literally useless, as with much that is orc, strength in numbers is the name of the game. Snotlings can either spread through an area like a green wave, suffocating anything that falls beneath its sweeping tide, or they may even deliberately sacrifice themselves by crawling into enemy weapons and machinery to literally clog them with the dead.
And yet I'm not surprised at all. That is something they would do, because, you know, it's something to do, and it's funny.
Only Tyrannids have been seen to also exhibit this kind of behaviour to silence Imperial batteries. They can also be used as quite literal fodder, wasting enemy ammunition or just as a distraction.
I still wonder who would win in a fight, like a fair fight, orcs or Tyrannids? Because Tyrannids are kind of unfair. They have stupidly huge numbers. Tyrannids have so many numbers that they are a threat to literally all other races in the 40k galaxy combined. The Tyrannids that are in the galaxy are already a massive threat and a problem, but it's theorized that all the Tyrannids there are one tendril of a finger of a scouting party. That's how many there are. And it's also theorized that they may actually be fleeing from something even worse than them. At which point I think that the writers may have painted themselves into a corner at that point, because what could be scarier than that? Let's say in a fair fight, I feel like the orcs would not do too badly. I think the Tyrannids might still win because they're the stuff of nightmares. But hey, orcs have comedy physics on their side. The more orcs fight, they just get bigger. But Tyrannids are eating the orcs and evolving. Well, here's the scariest thing that Tyrannids can do. If you outsmart them or outmaneuver them with a battle tactic, that tactic will never work on them ever again. Like, they kind of figure out why they lost and then they evolve a counter strategy to that forever. So you can outsmart them, but you can only outsmart them once with each tactic. I think they'll beat the orcs, as much as I love orcs. I think the only way orcs can win is if they actually just believe they're stronger, in which case they just will be. But again, the Tyrannids are so ridiculous that they could have some weird counter to that as well.
And finally, Snotlings can even be used themselves as an especially unpleasant living ammunition. Shock attack guns use a narrow beam or force field to essentially teleport matter through the warp over very short distances, usually invisible range. And Snotlings are the only orc creatures not to be smart enough to understand the consequences of this. In the process, they are driven into mindless rages of being propelled through even a short space of the Imperium with no protection. They then will be ported either inside an enemy vehicle, or worse, inside a target's armour, or even inside the living creature's own body.
Snotlings don't understand that if you're in the warp, even for like, I think a few seconds, that will literally just nuke your brain and make you go completely nuts. So yes, why not? Orcs can just shoot Snotlings through your armor or just teleport them inside your own body. Why not? It's a free country.
They'll materialize in a frenzy, immediately ripping and tearing and generally lashing out at whatever until they are either killed or die from ripping their own limbs and bodies apart in a mindless tantrum. Not to mention, snots being fired through this nightmare weapon is said to materialize defecating uncontrollably. Such a terrifying process, they are quite literally shitting themselves.
So they just teleport inside your body, thrashing around, ripping apart everything, including themselves, and just shitting everywhere. Yes, this would be a horrible battlefield to find yourself in.
So for anybody looking at you, guardsmen, unlucky enough to have a raging snotling ported inside of them, the consequences are going to be traumatizing.
I think, like, there's no recovering from that. Hang on, I want to read this. This is some authentic Orcish we have right here in chat, and it goes something like this.
We've been writing red, cause red make us you go faster. So our boss said, oi, maybe it'll make you get learn faster. So we wrote in red, and now we're smarter. And we almost started fighting to contemplate life, but he got a barbog all depressed, and he crumped himself. So nowadays, the boss said we can't read no more.
That's basically how orcs talk. It's one of the most beautiful and poetic languages I've ever heard in my entire life.
Mech boys, or mechs, are orcs who have a natural affinity for engineering, inventing, and generally building orc machinery. This, as with orc surgical operations, have a somewhat if not fully improvised nature about them. While some mech creations are somehow fairly standard issue, For other things, it often ends up being a matter of using whatever is to hand, and not significantly more complicated than just bolting X onto Y and willing it to work. Very much
Bolting X onto Y and willing it to work. That is Orc technology in a nutshell. Their powers of belief are so strong that it's theorized that Orcs are unintentionally making the God Emperor of mankind even stronger. Why? Because they think he's strong. Like, Orcs don't understand who the God Emperor of mankind is, but they do know that all the Astartes, all the Imperium, all humans think he's the strongest human ever. So the Orcs are like, well,
He must be strong then. He must be really strong. He must be the strongest Umi ever.
and because all the Orcs think that the God Emperor of mankind is that strong, the God Emperor becomes stronger. He has this massive power boost from the Orcs, completely unintentionally. And I don't think even the Imperium is aware of this. It's just brilliant. It's what I love about 40k so much, is that, yeah, it's all cool that you have, like, you know, these big mechs, these powerful war machines and weird races, but I love the lore explanations. I think Warhammer 40k is this brilliant exercise in creativity, and just seeing how ridiculous you can make things and have explanations for all of it. And the fact that it's believable is what's so funny. They set up a weird series of rules, and then they see how far they can push the world within those rules. It's just fantastic. How dope are their chins on their helmets as well? Just this massive, gigantic, spiky underbite. It's like, oh, such a statement.
Then again, the mech's odd creation of tech could prove too successful and become uncontrollable and become a literal loose cannon firing on anything, as its operator loses the ability to keep it directed toward the enemy with any moderate sense of accuracy. As with most things, it's really hard to consider if an orc would be happy or unhappy about being obliterated by the creativity of their own kind, but you could pretty easily speculate that they wouldn't be best pleased of being robbed of the opportunity to gun down their foes with the excessively powerful and destructive mechanisms that the mech promise would be a sure thing. It can be one of those things which, again, it could be a positive outcome for you, or it could be very, very negative. While much of studied orcs has shown them to enjoy surface dwelling to that of space or the skies, there are always those who buck the trends to take on specialised roles, and these are guys like the Flyboys, a subcategory of orc speed freaks, and they go beyond that of the surface speed addicts. The Flyboys need even further speed-fueled gratification, and this speed addiction only drives them to demand more and more exhilaration and more extreme behaviour. While orcs do not have specifically designated kamikaze pilots, which you might assume easily that they would, the nearest thing to this is the Blitzer bomber, basically a dive-bombing aircraft where pulling out of their dive at the last moment is generally the employed approach. This ends often with less than effective results, where the pilot instead plows straight into the ground, clouded by their addiction to go faster.
So basically, they're not intentionally kamikaze pilots, but they result in that most of the time because it's fun to see how close they can get to their target before pulling up. And because they're such shit pilots, they basically just crash into you half the time.
However, orc bombers do contain a Gretchin-based suicidal delivery system known as the Grot bomb. These can be launched from a fighter bomber or also from ground-based mobile systems. Unlike a standard dumb bomb, the Grot bomb is more of a smart weapon, although the use of the word smart is not necessarily the best description. The Grot bombs are basically a rocket aircraft with a warhead attached, and they have sensors to assist the Gretchin pilot to guide the bomb to their target.
You know in Mario, where they shoot that giant, like, huge black bomb thing at you, or like a missile at you, and it's got like a face painted onto it? This looks like the adult version of that.
The end result usually being more accurately to assist the Gretchin pilot to guide the bomb to their target. The end result usually being more accurately delivered devastation. The Gretchin are then inevitably vaporized on impact, and despite the surety of death, there never seems to be any shortage of volunteers for the role of being a Grot pilot.
They know that there's a high chance of them dying, but it's probably like so fun for them to fly a plane that they don't care.
While being referred to by some as orc slavers for their enslavement and subjugation of non-orc life forms, they are more regularly the equivalent of orc cat herders. These are the Runt herds. Herein lies the subjective misery of their task, but again the positive duality of their role lies in the financial benefits for taking on this position few orcs would wish for, benefits that are fairly substantial. The self-explanatory title of Runt Herder tells you everything you need to know. They are basically the overseers of Gretchin and Snotlings. An endlessly irritating and thankless task, and most annoyingly a herder will likely spend more time whipping Gretchin and kicking Snotlings to get to their big gun positions than they will fighting themselves. As with all orcs though, these individuals play a critical role in orc society, because where most orcs have little patience for lesser forms, the runt herds somehow exhibit the rarest of orc traits: patience. This is rare among their own kind, but even less to have patience for the lower runt-like forms of the Grots and Snots. If it were not for this abnormal level of patience though, orcs would be continually slowing and inhibiting their own societal growth by too regularly casually ending those whose sole lot in life is to serve and provide the expansion for orc society. Still, patience as a description for runt herd is again not patience as we would envisage. It simply means that they're not going to rip off a Gretchin's head or break them in half just because they happen to do something slightly displeasing.
Yes, orc patience is slightly different from patience as we know it. It just means they're slightly less unreasonable than everyone else.
Even more unusually, a herder will actually explain their duties to the lower forms and actively incentivize them. While the Gretchin and Snotlings live to serve, they
Now that's very unusual for an orc, to actually explain what they're doing and why they do it.
They still have opinions on their treatment and will only take so much abuse. Gretchin have been known to rebel and form exiled clans of their own when they felt that they were getting too raw of a deal in orc townships. With all that said, a runt herd will with no qualms beat, batter and generally violently abuse the runts who disobey without a second thought. The best motivation is, after all, a proper good kick-in. Well-trained grots can be sold up to orcs, giving herders a regular and pretty substantial income of teeth in orc terms. Some runt herds have even been known to train up Snotlings to play a role similar to that of orc commandos. Just how this could be possible is one of the examples that almost anything is possible in orc culture. Some legendary runt masters have even created super grots and snots who have enhanced abilities through breeding and considerable patience in training.
Rebel Grots.
And so finally we come to the rebel Gretchin. It's one thing to be the runts of orc society, but at least you know your place. You know to keep in your lane. Yet some Gretchin have been known to buck this fairly established system, much to the disgust of all. It's not a common occurrence to be sure, but where it can happen once, it can happen again, and rebellion is a filthy, filthy word in the ranks of orcs. Reactionary Grots formed a committee to object to their systematic exclusion from joining a Waaagh. Being forced to work their fingers to the bone but not participate in the big Waaagh, this was too much, and many Grots had had enough.
There's that term they're using called
A warg.
in Warhammer 40K,
A war.
is the collective term for an orc army, their deafening battle cry, and the apocalyptic galaxy-spanning crusades they embark upon. It represents a massive psychic field of pure aggressive energy that orcs generate, which binds them together, fuels their morale, and even makes their cobbled together, physically non-functional technology work.
A warg.
Acts on multiple levels within the universe and the tabletop game. In the lore, a Waaagh is a massive cultural migration and military campaign. When orc populations reach a critical mass, a powerful war boss unites millions of scattered greenskins. This causes their psychic energy to swell, making the orcs physically larger, smarter, and incredibly violent as they roll across the galaxy to fight. It's so fucking sick. If you're playing Total War Warhammer and you're playing as the orcs, they have like a Waaagh mechanic. And I think it works something like this. I haven't played in like 7 years, but if you're not fighting enough, your orcs get bored and they actually start attacking each other. So your army's health overall goes down because all your soldiers are just punching each other in the face. But the more you fight and the more battles you win, the more cities you conquer, it builds up this crazy Waaagh meter. And then like more armies on your side just spawn out of nowhere. You just now have a 20 stack of like new armies. And it's like,
All right, boys, let's get to fighting.
and the more you keep fighting, the more armies you just spawn out of nowhere. And you just roll around like this green tide, just crushing everything. But that kind of in a nutshell is how it works.
The psychic field.
Because orcs subconsciously believe that their weapons and ramshackle vehicles should function, the psychic Waaagh energy bends reality to make it true. For example, if an orc genuinely believes that painting a vehicle red makes it go faster, the psychic field actually makes it go faster. That is Orc Science 101. the bigger the Waaagh, the stronger the magic they have in their area. That's how one group turned an entire moon into a flying ship. Orcs, ladies and gentlemen.
When Gretchin revolt in numbers, filling their mech town streets with diminutive green skins, they marched to meet orc leaders, who would, on careful consideration as to what to do with these rebelling Grots, decided the best course of action was, unsurprisingly, to beat the living snot out of the Grots, punching and beating them with fist, rifle butts, and many a head kicking. This was a fairly poorly but quite obviously chosen option for the Orcs, who now set off a chain reaction of raging Grot retaliation. Shops and slops were entered and smashed up, but the Orcs, only briefly stunned by such an outlandishly rare uprising, were more than happy to get in the mix and bang their bloody heads together, and much smashing, crushing, ripping and bleeding would follow. Some of the Gretchin would eventually surrender, but others instead chose a self-imposed exile to become rebel Grots. Leaving the mech town, they'd walk for days to find a new home, and many would perish, and this only further embittered them to their former orc masters. Eventually, having found a new home and setting themselves up, these rebel Grots are seen as some of the most despised by the orcs of a mech town. The rebel Grots regularly will launch new raids to steal scrap, engage in sabotage, and generally sow discord. Their existence and ideology will usually bring new Gretchin recruits who are disillusioned by their orc masters. The rebel Gretchin are fanatical about their campaign against the masters that they feel gave them the right royal screw job. The rebel Grots can also include Snotlings who are either captured before...
Just look at these faces, man. Just look at the character in this guy's face. Like, he is so happy. Like whatever he's about to do is horrible, and there's nothing he'd rather be doing. This is the best thing in the world to him. He's just loving it.
Or they know what's what, or who just similarly run away. Any Grots who rebel in this manner are fairly unusual and a totally counterproductive force, and they have to surely be considered as one of the worst positions to occupy in Orc society wherever they may occur. Their tactics of sabotage, theft, and even having been known to use captives as bargaining chips for ransoms or trades, they're surely a much hated and lowly faction of Orc culture.
We should read this in Imperium voice.
The orcs plague the galaxy. I pray with all my faith that some great catastrophe will annihilate them, but I fear, ultimately, that it is they, not we, who shall rule the galaxy.
I think the orcs are kind of unkillable. You can't get rid of them. They're kind of a bit of a plague.
All right, boys, it's on. Let's go. This is gonna be fun. Nothing better than the sound of a Robert Crump in tank armor, set maybe the screaming that comes out of the burning wrecks. War boss, Dreadtooth.
The Warhammer 40K universe is a miserable place to be, but if you had to choose to be anyone there, choose Orc. They're the only ones having a fun time. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the Orcs 10 best/worst jobs from Warhammer 40K by Luton09. This guy, I think, is one of the best YouTubers, period. The way he talks about Warhammer 40K, it sounds like he's talking about real history. His use of imagery, atmosphere, like ambient sounds, it creates this immersive type of Warhammer 40K video that I don't really see from any other channel. His content saved you during the COVID lockdown. It's funny you say that, Cyrus, because I think that's when I was listening to it as well. It's like, you couldn't go outside. Oh well, may as well put my mind into this horrific and fascinating universe while I brush my teeth or just like hang out in my house. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed a bit of Sebbywebz Warhammer 40K content. Let me know if you want to see more. Like, subscribe, and catch me live on Twitch.
And that's it, boys. The video's over. Now scram.